Hey everyone, good evening. Welcome back to the Lookout. Today is the 9th of August, 2025. If you're just joining us for the first time, welcome. This is a place where we look at fire intelligence, talk about what's happening with forest fires, how they're fought, who's doing things, how they're doing them, why they're doing them, whether or not we think they're going to work. We're hoping to give you context on forest fires and the ways of fire world. My background's in mapping and forestry and fire. I've been working in fire since 1995 when I worked on a crew that was mapping thinning projects. So since then I've been doing all kinds of stuff around fire, prescribed fire, mapping, storytelling, all kinds of stuff. So welcome back everyone. Thanks to our sponsors, and today we're going to talk a bit about the Gifford fire. The Gifford fire was pretty mellow today. Then we're going to go back out to Arizona and Utah for the Dragon Bravo and Monroe. We were really pretty engaged in covering those about a week, 10 days ago before things got busy here in California. And then I took a week off, and so I want to catch back up on some of that stuff. But we'll start with Gifford. Fly over to Gifford fire and check it out. Been working on writing up kind of what we talked about yesterday on here about the potential for the Gifford fire to make big runs and keep on spreading. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just hang back and see what happens today before I make any bold pronouncements. And the fire didn't do much, so there you go. Sometimes you just gotta wait and see. But anyway, I did some mapping today, kind of creating some visuals to help me figure out what I thought was going on. So I'm going to share those with you for Gifford. So I'm going to start off here. I'm going to go to the Gifford fire. So here's a map of the Gifford fire in red. We got Santa Maria over here, San Luis Obispo, and if you're not from around California, this is LA down here and San Francisco up here, and so this is the central coast, kind of between San Francisco and Santa Barbara. Pretty much depends on who you ask where the central coast begins. It's kind of more a state of mind than hard geography, but I kind of consider the central coast to be, Monterey to Santa Barbara. In the past, I just thought everything south of Fresno was Southern California, but as I've gotten older, I've gotten wiser. Anyway, so here on the Central Coast, we've got these kind of interior valleys, and I was looking at the weather forecast for out of the Oxnard Weather Service office, and they said that the marine layer right now is about 1,200 feet thick, and that we can kind of expect that the marine layer won't really push inland higher than 1,200 feet. So I made a map showing that area in blue. So and the reason that this is important is that the marine layer is this kind of layer of moist, foggy, damp air that rolls in, especially in the summer, and it kind of keeps the coast moist. And it fingers up into the canyons, but it kind of creates its own kind of local microclimate. And so if we look at our kind of weather satellites here, you can kind of see, like up here in Monterey, Monterey's always foggy in the summer, so you can see there's this layer of fog pushing inland, and down here also you can see kind of through the day you can see fog on the coast, and so that coastal fog kind of pushes in interior, and so we'd look at a big fire like the Gifford fire here that's 100,000 acres, and there's like no way it's going to burn to Santa Maria or Nipomo or SLO itself, San Luis Obispo. So I thought it'd be interesting to kind of look at fire history here. So if you look at where we've had large historic fires and you look at this marine layer, you basically see that that's the case. What I was talking about with that you don't have that many fires that push down the coast. I mean, part of that is because the coast is also agriculture and bean fields and stuff. But in general, if you look at kind of the big picture in kind of San Luis Obispo County, Central Coast, that marine layer, we don't have a lot of fires that push out down into the coastal plain. So I thought that the reason I brought this stuff up was because I've been curious about how this fire's potential for moving up towards Santa Margarita and Cuesta Grade. So if you come out of San Luis Obispo, you go up to Cuesta Grade, then you're into kind of the interior of the state. Paso Robles, it's hot and dry. So as soon as you get kind of over the coast range and you're no longer in that marine influence, it gets hot and dry, and it's kind of like the rest of kind of the interior of California. Maybe it's 95 degrees in Paso, and it's like 65 in Morro Bay. So that's why you don't have a lot of fires on the coast. But this fire here, it does kind of have this potential pathway to burn through these wilderness areas to the north, up towards Pozo. And after yesterday's growth, yesterday's growth was from here to here, and the day before that, the fire grew substantially. So yesterday we were looking at the progression here of Gifford, and we've had some big runs. So if you look at the Gifford fire and how it's unfolded, there's been days where the fire spread 6 miles. August 4th, the fire spread 6 miles. August 5th, 6 miles. August 6th, 4 miles. August 7th, 4 or 5 miles. So that was what got me thinking, like, hey, we should take a look at what's going to happen here. The fire's potential to keep growing and gobbling, really. So, yesterday the fire put on this piece here. And so I thought, well, is it going to do that every day? The fuel type isn't changing. The topography is difficult. Well, today it didn't. Today the fire kind of is burned, and it's added a few thousand acres. So kind of less than I might have expected based on kind of what we've had with the weather and the fuels being as thick as they are and everything else. So I think today there wasn't much wind, and also the fire out here is kind of smoking away, and prevailing winds are carrying the smoke over the active edge of the fire. And so shading on those fuels at the flaming front affects their flammability. So if we look here at kind of the north end of the fire for like the last 6 hours, you can just see that there's this kind of big cloud of smoke from the rest of the fire that's kind of shading out the active part of the fire here. So the fire was active today, but it didn't push up like a giant mushroom cloud and spread 5 miles like it has on a lot of other days. Now, one thing we've been seeing on these fires is this fire has been spreading a lot at night. And so, if we look at the last 24 hours here, you can see that the fire is burning actively through the night. And oftentimes the way you can tell that is like, if the fire is bright enough in the middle of the night that it's overwhelming the infrared sensor and it's playing kind of color at night, usually that tells you that the fire's putting out a lot of light. It looks like daylight. The camera switches into kind of daylight mode again, because at night the cameras kind of default and go to infrared mode. So anyway, won't be surprised if the fire does grow substantially tonight, but hopefully during the day today, the fact that the fire was somewhat behaving itself, see if they made any progress. If we look at the fire lines for the Gifford, they're hidden here somewhere. See, the fire is it's burning in an area where the maps, we got the mapping for the fire lines day before yesterday. And right now the fire is active in this wilderness area. So this is the Garcia Wilderness. And oftentimes there's hesitancy to drop dozer blades and push within the wilderness. And there's not great opportunities here kind of necessarily to connect the dots and put in dozer line. So we don't really know what's going on out here as far as what line's being constructed, if there's hand line, if there's dozer line, and what the strategy is here. But all in all today, the fire has the fuels and topography and weather create opportunity for the fire, and the wind kind of was the missing element today. So it's kind of not out of the woods yet, but if you look at the areas that were active compared to previous days, it's a really small proportion of the fire that's like really active. So what you have to know is that when you hear that there's 5% containment, oftentimes that doesn't mean that the fire is active across 100,000 acres. It just means they're not ready to walk away and say that those areas are contained. But when we look kind of at the fire spread, the only place that the fire is spread today are places where you don't see the blue line on the edge. So there's minor growth down at this end. And if we look at our progression map, that was several days ago, and we look at this blue line that we've got, like there's only a few little portions on the map that are new growth on kind of anywhere on the fire outside of what has been mapped over the previous days. So all in all, there's just not a lot to report on Gifford today, except that it wasn't that active. So I'm working on a post on our blog about the potential for the fire to kind of, if it had the right winds, the terrain and fuels are there for the fire to continue to spread north. They're getting, all it takes is a couple days of opportunity for the firefighters to really get the upper hand. If the fire keeps making 5-mile runs every day, it's really hard for them to get ahead of it. And so a slow day like today gives them time to prep lines farther out that may be the eventual kind of boundary of the fire. If the fire's marching 5 miles every day and you're working 7 miles out, you might not have time to get the line prepped before the fire gets there. So still potential for the fire to blast up here, but this is a different report than it would have been if the fire had moved 5 miles today. They are using a lot of retardant drops. The problem with the retardant, though, in this fuel type is just that the fire can burn under the retardant. So retardant lands on the top of the brush. The brush has got a lot of dead material down below it, and so the fire, it's retardant, meaning it slows it down. It doesn't put the fire out. So you have to actually get out there and cut a fire line through the brush and have kind of bare mineral soil, or the fire can just kind of chunk along underneath the retardant that's on the top of the brush and keep going. So retardant in itself, it's handy for slowing the fire down. In grass, it can put the fire out completely, but in timber, heavy litter, heavy dead and down branches, heavy brush, retardant just slows it and buys time. Okay, so that's pretty much what we got. This purple line out here was kind of planned fire line as of yesterday morning. What we were looking at here is just that this fire line basically follows the road, and then there's a wilderness area here, and we said that it could be hard for them to hold the fire on a mid-slope road, and so they'd have to come out here and be bulldozing ridge tops. So I'll be curious to see if the fire keeps moving, if the National Forest will be using dozers in the wilderness. It's not unheard of, but it's not popular. All right, so that's what we got for Gifford. We're going to jump now to Arizona and check out the Dragon Bravo fire. If you're affected by the Gifford fire, we'll keep reporting on it. All right, so Dragon Bravo. All right, so here we have the Grand Canyon. Someone's asking about the cliff fire. I'm not sure which one. The big cliff. Oh, Northern California. Yeah, we can talk about that at the end. Okay, so here we are. We're in the Grand Canyon. Big picture. Here's California. Here's Arizona. Here's Utah. And here in the Grand Canyon, we've got the Dragon Bravo fire. Dragon Bravo started, I think, on July 1st. And we've covered this one extensively, so if you want background on this fire, go back to our earlier broadcast. Someone's asking about the Canyon fire. Pretty sure the Canyon fire is out, done. Haven't heard anything about it today. All right, so Dragon Bravo is kind of a complicated fire in that it was originally they thought they'd let it burn for resource benefits to benefit the ecology of the nature and flora and fauna of this area. So the fire was burning down in here, and the initial day or two they're like, hey, we're gonna let this fire burn a bit, it's doing good stuff. And then they got some winds they didn't expect, the fire blew up, it hauled ass down here to the North Rim Lodge, and it burned down this popular, beloved structure. And so started off in here. Fire's now pretty large. We're not crazy big on acreages and all that, but if you want to know how big it is, look it up. This fire started here in these blue colors, and it has moved through the rainbow towards red, burned the North Rim, and then that was just getting started. And then we kind of followed it as they lit a backfire here, and it snuck around that, and it burned out to here, and then it lit a backfire here, and it snuck around that, and it kept burning. So the only parts of the fire that are still really active are these red areas. Fire made like a 5-mile run down into the Grand Canyon, almost all the way to the river, day before yesterday, or maybe yesterday, which I think probably surely surprised some people who thought that part was done. But you can see the fire slowly been chunking its way, day by day by day by day by day, off to the sides, and that's not all bad ecologically. If you look at how the fire's kind of flanked out through here, you can see that a lot of the forest here is still green. So this imagery here shows severity, and you can see that before the fire, you had kind of this patchy, scrubby forest out here, and after the fire, you still have a lot of green trees. So resource benefit wise, this fire has achieved a lot of resource benefits. It just also has achieved a lot of resource not benefits, or benefits other than what the managers probably hope for, like killing lots of trees, burning down the lodge, burning log cabins, burning people's careers, burning public trust in fire management. The negatives are substantial. But you see areas out in here that had like, hey, this whole area burned and it's still got green forest, and this forest is better off and will be less likely to burn severely in the future. So anyway, on this infrared map, you can see the fire is kind of active just on a little bit of this edge. What was remarkable about this fire is for how long it burned with like zero control. And finally, they kind of caught a break. They kind of steered it north. They did firing operations along the Park Road, and those were successful. And so the progression map really kind of tells the story here of a lot of loss until they kind of got it tied into this road, and they've since then managed to keep it to the east of the Park Road. And when we went on vacation, basically the fire was getting up to a recent fire. And so this area here burned 2 years ago, and I thought maybe they'd stop it here because the fire got narrow and looked like they had some opportunity to pinch it off here, but it squirted around on them. This fire has just really been kind of unruly dragon, and so yeah, it squirted around and last couple days it's made some significant runs on the north. But if you look at this white line, the white line's the night before last, red line is last night, so they've kind of are down to the kind of short straws here on the north end of this fire, and it might be done, but don't count it out because this fire has just done whatever the heck it wanted for a long time now, and it's still just kind of doing whatever it wants. And so one of the reasons for that is the weather. When we look at kind of our global circulation here, there's been this remarkable lack of moisture in Arizona. So usually kind of early July, we've got high pressure that kind of sets up over the kind of the four corners here, and here we've got these low pressure systems moving across now that were kind of blocked for weeks off the coast of British Columbia. And you see the air circulates kind of counterclockwise around low pressure systems, and it circulates clockwise around high pressure systems. And so when that low's sitting up here, the circulation around it brings moisture from the Gulf into Arizona and New Mexico, and it brings the monsoon, and we get rain, and then fires don't get big. And sometimes we even get that monsoonal moisture into California, and that can cause our lightning storms in the summer. Anyway, that pattern's still kind of there. Arizona's just stayed super dry, You're finally starting to get a little bit of moisture into Utah, but for like the first 2 weeks we were reporting, maybe even the first month we were reporting on this fire, we just had a steady southwest flow coming off of Baja, which is a desert, bringing no moisture. So the conditions have abated a little, which is why they actually maybe have some like progress on the map now. But as long as the conditions stay critical, it's really, firefighters don't have a lot going for them. And these guys have just kind of been taking they've done a lot of work out here. And if you look at the kind of operations map, they've been putting a dozer line out here and kind of trying to catch the fire where they can. But really the fire's done what it wanted, and they've kind of picked it up where the fire was going to let them pick it up. On the north end here, you see some dozer line that they put in that didn't hold. On farther up here, you see a bunch of dozer line they put in that didn't hold. Up here, you see dozer line that did hold. And now they've got dozer line around the part that squared out on them when they lost it here. But it's just been a lot of catch up they had to play kind of from the get-go on this fire. So that's Dragon Bravo. Like I said, we're always interested in that ecology and seeing, there's large portions out in here where they did their firing operations that still have green trees. And as far as a visitor impact goes, if you're driving the park road down into the park, you're going to see a lot of green forest in the future here. You're going to see some areas that burned hot, but it'll be interesting. You can burn a whole landscape and still drive through it and a lot of people will never even know this happened until they get to the lodge and it's not there anymore. But you look at the road here, it's like there's green trees all along, all the way down to the north rim. There's green trees all along the road. So it's really tough to parse the relative benefits versus the temporary losses from a fire like this. One thing that we've seen a lot that's interesting to me is a fire like this might create an opportunity you might get another fire that's worse, and it burns into this area and it goes out because this area is now burnt. So you never know with any of this stuff what would have, I don't know what I'm trying to say here. It's just using fire and managing land. Managing land is really difficult under the best circumstances, and managing land in areas that have had fire exclusion and a crazy management history, it's just really hard to parse out what is needed where and what is good and what's a bad outcome. I'd say as far as the overall, if you look at the satellite image of the entire burn, there's some good things that came out of this fire. There's thousands of acres, but trees don't vote. A lot of people were never going to hike out here and see this forest and know the difference of whether it was good or bad. So, yep, it's messy stuff. We're still hoping. I was hoping to get some of the paperwork on the original decision to let this fire burn. There will be an investigation, and we look forward to seeing what happened with that. But as we've said over and over, fire doesn't read policy documents. Fire doesn't care much about any of what humans think about what it should do or what it shouldn't do. Fire just does what it wants to do. Anyway, that's Dragon Bravo. Let's fly up to Utah now and talk about Monroe Canyon a little. All right, this is on the Fish Lake National Forest. We're now in Utah, and this fire, I'm going to hold my Utah jokes. Here's Salt Lake City up here. Down here is Richland, and so we're kind of like halfway between the Arizona border and Salt Lake City, about 150 miles south of Salt Lake City. And this fire's kind of been burning on this kind of island in the sky. So, you've got these valleys that are kind of deserty, and then you got this high country, and some of the high country in this fire is like 9,000 feet or more. And that's where the trees grow out here. So here's a severity map of this fire. You see a large proportion of the fire did burn with a high severity. Monroe Canyon fire. A lot of the stuff out here that's bright red, it's fine that it burned with a high severity because it's just desert, it's scrub, it's grass. And if we look at a lot of the areas that burned in this fire, that burned with a high severity, a lot of them are, were scrub. But there was also a ton of forest here that burned. So where is this fire active? If we look at the white line here, let's just sort our way through this stuff. All right, so here's today's infrared, and we'll throw in a white line from yesterday. So where the fire is active, pretty much just on the south end here, which had pretty significant growth in the last 24 hours. I don't have any landmarks here, but fire burned, several thousand acres on the south end in this kind of patchwork of scrub and aspen and some kind of mixed conifer, like some subalpine fir or something like that. Kind of high desert. We are here at 9,400 feet. So the fire kind of had some wind and did what it wanted to do here yesterday. But pretty much once you go around the rest of the fire all the way up to the top, no spread on the fire. Most of the fire is like completely cold. There's a little bit of interior heat kind of up by Monument Peak, Glenwood Mountain. But this area here along Highway 24 got fired as a part of the control. They lit off backfire off of here over a week ago, and that's that whole side of the fire's out. And pretty much coming around the north end here towards Glenwood and all the way back to Monroe, there's no new spread in the last 24 hours on the fire until maybe just a little bit here on the south flank of Glenwood Mountain. There's still some scattered heat out here. Yeah, we had, maybe 100 acres of spread or less kind of on the steep slopes here on the kind of south flank of Glenwood Mountain. But that's it. So this fire is pretty much done except for these little pockets, that are kind of hard to get to or what yeah, so south end's got some heat. That middle part has some heat, but other than that, this fire is donezo. And just to kind of pull back up the infrared, here's some infrared from a week ago, and you can see at that time there was concentrated heat on the kind of south end of the fire, and there was a lot of heat up on Monument Peak fire or Monument Peak. But since then, this infrared barely just shows a little bit of heat kind of where the fire's cooking around on the south end, and then other than that, we kind of see our severity here in the reds. You can see that in the high country there were some areas within the fire perimeter that didn't get completely roasted, but all in all, this fire had pretty high severity in most of the timbered area it burned in. Someone wants to hear Utah jokes. Well, I don't want to isolate any. I don't know. That would be rude. We're in Utah right now. I could tell Utah jokes if we were in Arizona, but right now we're in Utah, so. No, I like Utah. I don't ever get out there, so it's been a long time. Anyway, both these fires, I got to say, and I've said before when we do these broadcasts, like I'm not an expert on high elevation Utah fire ecology. I've never worked on a fire in Utah. I've never worked on a fire in Arizona. I've worked on fires in New Mexico, but I can't really tell you much more than I'm just looking at stuff and telling you stuff I do know. So pardon if I get something wrong too. Put in the comments, and I won't complain. Anyway, that's the perimeter of the fire. And as we talked about on this before, when we look at the progression of this fire, we had some really impressive days. Like we love these progression maps because they just show you a color for a day. So we talked earlier about how this fire, it ran this whole drainage in one day. Thousands of acres. It ran this whole purple blob in one day. And that happens quite a bit, on a big fire like this. The weather of a certain day really drives the fire behavior, drives the fire effects. And then sometimes the weather will settle down and the fire will, it'll take days or weeks to kind of fill in from here to here. And so over the course of that progression, we get a real wide variety of fire effects. So oftentimes if you look at kind of the fire effects you got, and you look at the progression, you'll see that you got moderate fire effects maybe because the fire, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe took 8 days to go from here to here. In that time, it burned at night, it burned in the morning, it burned in the afternoon. So when a fire takes a longer time to go across the landscape, oftentimes you get kind of gentler results than if it just blasts this entire drainage in one afternoon. You still got kind of less severe results in that one day where this entire bowl burned, just because some of this landscape is wet meadow, high elevation kind of wet meadow, and wasn't gonna burn. So fire's fickle, but we love these kind of images to kind of help make sense of that when you have a fire this size, it isn't just one big huge black stain on the landscape. There's a huge amount of variety in a burn scar. Rambling Ryan says, I like Utah and the people there. Good people everywhere. There's great people everywhere, and thanks for sharing that. Okay, well that's about it for West Coast Fire Report. Someone asked about Big Cliff, so we'll jump in there. I'm not sure what I've got loaded up for Big Cliff, but let's see. Big Cliff. Oh yeah, I got it. I got home, and it takes me a while to kind of rebuild my my brain after not looking at things. So Big Cliff, just to give you your orientation, we started off talking about this fire over a week ago. It's burning in the Klamath Mountains. These green areas are wilderness areas. Here's Eureka, here's Wairika, and in between you've got the Marble Mountains, the Klamath. And we've talked a lot about the Klamath on this program. If you are interested in learning more about the Klamath, you can, if you search Klamath on our YouTube, you'll probably find 100 videos. Anyway, Big Cliff is burning in an area that burned 2014. This whole area burned in the White's fire, which is, like a lot of fires in the Klamath, that had kind of a mixed severity. It left a lot of trees standing, and so this fire here started as a lightning strike, and it's kind of progressed across. They've kind of managed to hold it in this bowl here, and it's kind of like gradually burning out this whole bowl. Really steep, a lot of snags, but really pretty mellow fire behavior for the most part. I got some photos sent to me from this bottom fire line. It's really green and kind of lush and looked even chilly. So this fire is slowly kind of consuming what's available to it, but they've kind of got line pretty much all the way around it, except for maybe this part here, which is going to go up in the rocks. And we're thinking there's probably going to be beneficial fire effects here. I haven't pulled up satellite imagery, but I don't see why it wouldn't be. The fire really was mellow back through here. They had a lot of, one of the things that's going on right now is we've got a huge amount of resources, hotshot crews, other stuff available, because there's just not much going on. There's nothing going on in Northern California. You got this fire, and then we have your normal kind of Clear Lake tweaker fires. We can jump down there and look at those a little bit too. But yeah, Big Cliff hasn't done much. It's just really gently spread across the landscape, and the landscape here is better off for this fire than it was before. It's cleaning up dead and down in an area that'll never get managed any other way. All right, so there's a couple fires today down around Clear Lake. There was a fire. I can't keep them straight. There's a lot of fires. Lake County. Let's just talk about Lake County for a minute. Here's so we're north of San Francisco Bay. We got you've got kind of the haves and have-nots in California, and Lake County is the have-nots and the people that work for the haves. And so you got Sonoma County here, you got Napa, you got, crazy fancy real estate and unaffordable housing and the wealthiest of the wealthy and their personal vineyards and everything else. And then you've got all the people that have to work for those people who can't afford to live nearby, who live around Clear Lake and everything else. And this area is like 100% fire country. So here's fires kind of pre-1960, 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, teens, and this decade. So just a lot of fire. You look at some places here in Lake County, this is the number of fire overlaps up till 2023. And you got places out here that have burned 5 times. You got places that burned 3 times. And this doesn't include even all the little small fires, but just to say that Lake County is always burning. And it's kind of this weird intersection of extreme poverty, crazy people running around doing dumb things, and super flammable, hot, dry, 105 degrees, dry grass everywhere, poor people that can't afford to weed eat around their trailer. It's like you got it all in Lake County, and it's kind of, this Clear Lake Battalion is like one of the busiest battalions in the state as far as human-caused fires. So we hardly even report on fires in Lake County unless they're going to burn for more than a couple hours, because they get hit hard and then they're done. But we said last year we did a report on this topic called Lake County's Burning Again, and just that basically over time everything's going to burn here. It just happens like 10 houses a year, 100 houses a year. Anyway, Lake County, it's a gnarly place. There's some nice stuff going on. There's nice people there. There's nice people everywhere. But Lake County's got a lot of problems. I was thinking today that Lake County basically, Lake County built my business. I had a fire mapping business, and right around the time I started it in 2011, there was a serial arsonist that was just running around Lake County, and this happens all the time. A friend of mine texted me today from he grew up in Lake County, and he was wondering, he's like, man, it seems like there's a serial arsonist. There's all these fires. He was just, and he's concerned. I mean, it's still his he's a native there. Not Native American, but he grew up there. But I feel like this one guy, this one arsonist, started all these fires over 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, and that's when I started my business. We were here a ton. There was big fires. There was the Rocky Fire here, 2015, burned into the Jerusalem Fire, burned into Hidden Valley. The Valley Fire, this all burned in the course of 2 months, and I felt like we were living in Lakeport. Anyway, you're hard pressed to find an area in Sonoma or Lake County or Napa County that hasn't burned in the last 2 decades. It's fire country, and there's just a huge amount of people there. So it's just like anywhere else. It's a problem. It's a fairly intractable problem as to how you fire safe a place like Lake County. And as we've talked about a lot on this program, there's this social overlay to wildfire that makes a lot of the problems really hard to solve. You got the poverty, the addiction, the disability, the lack of kind of community capacity to work together, and oftentimes all those things add up to make it really hard to deal with a problem that's already really complicated and involved to address. Geoplanet Jane says, I met a guy from Clear Lake who told me he was the only kid from his high school class who went to college. Yep. Yeah, I know a guy from Lakeport he's a PhD ecologist, but he said there's not a lot of other PhDs coming out of Lake County. But there's great stuff going on there. Some of the hopeful things that are happening in Lake County is that there's this outfit called Terra. It's the Tribal Eco Restoration Alliance. And there's a lot of natives in Lake County, and Terra's getting funding from CAL FIRE and other people to do prescribed burning and to do cultural burning and do land management and kind of resilience work And so there are hopeful things happening there. It's just that it's a tough place, and you drive through on Highway 20, and it's a real experience. Someone says, "Can I get a captioner?" If you wait and watch it after it's not live, you can turn on captions in YouTube. So I think that's probably the best thing we can do for the live stream. And Feral Cat's in. All right. Well, this is rambling. You guys got any questions? I'll answer some questions or fly around on the map if you want to look at some place in particular. But yeah, the fires that happened today in Lake County, they put them out pretty quick. We're not really covering much outside of California right now. We can if there's something interesting. But all in all, it's pretty quiet. It's very quiet for August. Usually in August you look at this map and you see a lot of red. You see a lot of big areas of red. And so we're not seeing much going on right now, and that's good. People need a break. We've got this hot weather. It's only going to last, sounds like, another week, and then we'll go back to cool off. So, California, so far so good. Knock on wood, we'll see what happens. Someone says they think the alerts sent out today were the most effective and accurate they've ever been. Is that for Lake County? Someone says Lake Piru. I'm guessing Lake Piru's down here. This fire here, the canyon fire, is pretty much done. It was done kind of yesterday morning after the first night. No, actually, was it yesterday morning? I can't even keep track. Yeah, this fire made a run and it was done. Firefighter got badly hurt on this fire, rolled his truck down a hill. And we haven't heard much more about that, but that's in the news. But other than that, this fire's it's no longer a threat to anyone, sounds like. This area is one of those places that's got an insane fire history. If you look at kind of the Castaic, Grapevine area, just showing the large fires. Over here by Fillmore, you've got areas that have burned 7 times. You got areas over here by Piru that have burned 7. And that's not, like I said, not counting the little small highway fires or anything. You get down here over by Malibu, and you got places that have burned 10. So it seems like a good segue. Someone's like, what's my... Ramblin' Ryan's asking where my concern is for the rest of the season. It's pretty hard to predict. We're all just one bad windstorm away from kind of tragedy in the fall. I feel like this time of year things start to get spicy, like the last week of August into September, as far as we start to get a pattern change that brings us more offshore winds. I'm going to talk a little bit about LA right now. Let's open something up here. I'm wanting to pitch our bike trip that we just did. So if you look at LA here and you look at these orange and purple lines, we were down in LA in May and we made a movie. And basically we stayed here in Hollywood. And then we rode, and this is the fire history layer we got here. So we rode over the Hollywood Hills, down the LA River, up the dry Arroyo Seco drainage canal, which was interesting. We saw some really wild homeless camps kind of packed down here, like right between the freeway and this canal. There was like some of the wildest kind of homemade shacks you've ever seen. Like there's just, yeah, like down in here there's like these whole neighborhoods of structures built kind of between the freeways and the canals. Anyway, we rode all the way over to Altadena here and we checked out the Eaton fire. And so we've got 2 videos out right now on our YouTube that are they're called Danger in Plain Sight, and we traversed from Altadena on bikes, e-bikes, We went over and we explored around Bel Air and Beverly Hills and kind of did like fire hazards of the rich and famous. And we looked at some really just crazy wackadoodle stuff. Like some of these neighborhoods, like you can't believe how bad the fire hazards are in some of these neighborhoods. You know, just the landscaping's crazy thick. These neighborhoods are basically going to be the next Palisades fire. And so we just made a movie about that. We ended up riding all over there. Purple is where we drove. Orange is where we rode our bikes. And then we ended up going over to the source of the Palisades fire and kind of stood up on the hill there and looked out to the ocean, looked at how the fire had burned, how it entered the neighborhoods. We went and rode around in neighborhoods out here, drove around in neighborhoods that we've looked at on the program. Then we ended up riding from Santa Monica all the way back through the heart of the city back to Hollywood at rush hour on bikes, which was great. It was, it was very doable. E-bikes are amazing. No close calls. Anyway, we made a movie about it, and it's out right now. It's a 5-part series on YouTube, and we want you all to watch it and tell your friends because we put a huge amount of work into it. Someone wants to see a fire severity map from the Six Rivers Lightning Complex of 22. Okay. Anyway, that's a pitch for the movie. Check it out. We had a great adventure. We captured it with a film crew, and we want you to all check it out. So yeah, my concern level for the rest of the season. Dang, we got a lot of stuff turned on here. Let me just kind of simplify it here. Okay. Middletown. Yeah, someone wants to see a fire severity map from Six Rivers Lightning Complex. I'd say check out, we made videos about that. So search for Six Rivers in our YouTube. There's a cool new map that CAL FIRE put out. It's a fire severity viewer, and you can open it up and you can go and pan around on the map and turn on and off the fire severity. But we've done a lot of reporting on those fires in 2022 and some good maps. But the short answer is that a lot of this area over here, where the fires burned, like up above Wichipec, if you zoom in now, you can see that a lot of that land survived, and a lot of the stuff that burned hot was stuff that was kind of brushy and scrubby before. So a lot of the areas in the 2022 fires in the Six Rivers burned with a really kind of mixed severity and were beneficial. Lots of acreage up there that got beneficial fire. The Perch fire, like, so all this in here burned in those fires, and a lot of it you can barely tell. A year later in this imagery, you can barely tell a lot of it burned. The Perch fire burned down by the town of Orleans, and same deal there. Like a lot of this area, there's some places that got some higher severity up on the hill, but a lot of it you can barely tell it happened. Bear Gulch fire. Yeah, where's the Bear Gulch fire? I don't know. Someone said, where have I worked in New Mexico? I worked out there on a big prescribed burn for Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation out by Socorro, kind of north of Magdalena. We burned about 6,000 acres in the spring. We had a helicopter and a helitorch, and got a lot of work done up high in Pine Forest. My crews worked in the kind of south end of New Mexico on a fire that was burning actually in Texas. And then also had crews that worked for me that were out mapping the Hermit's Peak, Calf Canyon fires, 2023 for, I don't know, quite a while. Valley Fire. Yeah, I could talk about the Valley Fire. Hood Canal, Lake Cushman. Okay, someone's asking about a fire up in Hood Canal. Yeah, I can't really talk, Sean. I don't have like materials really prepped to talk about any fires in Washington. Someone says they're out of Montana, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. Yeah, they have a big ranch. They bought some huge ranch in New Mexico, out by the big satellite, like radar telescopes that were in the movie Contact, and that's kind of a fun place to work. Okay, so someone's asking about Hidden Valley Lake, Middletown. Valley Fire. I was going to put together a little map here real quick. Someone asked if I'm done any work in San Diego County. I worked on the Cedar Fire in 2003. I worked on the Witch Fire and the Pumacha Fire in 2007. I haven't worked there much since then. Hang on, I'm just going to turn on the Valley Fire here. But I'd recommend anyone who lives in SoCal, check out our documentary. We talk a lot about how to kind of read the fire hazard, and we have a whole episode about how to harden your home against wildfire, like common things you can do to make your place more resilient in the face of fire. So there's a question here about the Valley Fire. This is a Valley Fire here that burned in 2015 in Lake County. This was a really bad fire. It burned in September, and what happens in the fall is we start to get kind of more northerly winds, and oftentimes those winds are drier than we would get from our prevailing winds coming from the southwest off the ocean. So this fire started kind of up by Cobb. There was this really strong northwest wind, and the fire burned most of this distance in like a single afternoon. And if you look at kind of a map of where there's structures out here, there were a lot more structures before this fire. There's a lot have been rebuilt, but it burned right through these really populated areas. And so the question is, like, what's the relative hazard out in this burn now? And I'd say it's pretty high. It's been 10 years. There's a lot of kind of weeds and scrub out here. And oftentimes in this landscape, turn off this fire. Those fine fuels are kind of what carries the fire. So you've got kind of standing dead brush from the fire with tall new brush grown into it. And you've got weeds everywhere, and you've got grass, and kind of all these elements that help fires spread quickly. And so, the fact that this burned already will kind of reduce the fire severity when the next fire happens, but it won't necessarily reduce the fire's rate of spread. And so if you live out in this area, what I like to say is that kind of previous fires show you the potential for the landscape. They show you that you've got terrain and fuel conditions here, and occasionally get the weather for a fire to grow large. And if you look at kind of the like the Rocky Fire, and if you look at like areas out here that had burned before, like this area out here in Middletown burned 15 years earlier in the Hidden Fire. So what we've seen since then is that we've had like the 2020 fires. They reburned a lot of stuff that had burned even in the previous decade. So like where you see the dark blue, it's the 2020 fires, and where you see the light blue, it's places that the 2020 fires burned stuff that had burned in the previous decade. Like a whole bunch of this land out here, kind of west of Capay Valley. So a decade-old fire scar carries fire just fine in this country. And Lake County, it's just, these are high-risk areas. They're hot all the time. Ton of people on the landscape, ton of weeds and fine fuels, and it's a dangerous place. So the best thing you can do in these places is mow. Like keep your area around your house cleared off. Mow kind of, or weed eat around the time the grass all dies. Weed eat it nice and low and rake it or blow it. And then that really solves a lot of the problems. If your place is like well mowed and you don't have stuff all around your house that can catch your house on fire, oftentimes these fires move fast. but they oftentimes are moving in confined fuels, especially around Clear Lake. This fire that happened today over here by Lucerne, like fires burn in grass, and fires that burn in grass are pretty easy to put out. And if your house is surrounded by grass and you've done your weed eating out, 100 feet or as far as you can, it goes a long ways towards being safer. If you have a lot of, if you have tall brush around your house, you got to clear that stuff. And if your neighbors, the big problem in a lot of this land is that your neighbors are a mess, and their place is going to catch on fire and burn your house down. And someplace, oftentimes there's nothing you can do about that. It's really, infuriating, but, you get a fire that's burning in a neighborhood like this, and it becomes a conflagration. It's not about burning brush. It's about your neighbor's boat, or your neighbor's RV, or your neighbor's old cars, or the kiddie pool that doesn't have any water in it. Like, it just becomes a different kind of animal. And the kinds of things we tell people about, like reducing fuels and defensible space and stuff, don't really apply as much to urban fires. So we talk about that also in our new video. It's just about the danger in plain sight, about kind of the differences and similarities between urban and wildland fires. You guys got good questions. I'll drink a little water. Nightcrawler LA says, is there a Cali law against trees too tall or not cutting your trees? Some places there's homeowners association. There's no state law that says that you can't cut trees on your property. There's a lot of red tape that comes up if you want to get a grant. If your neighborhood's trying to get a grant to do a fuel break or something, then you have to jump through all these hoops because you want state money. You have to go through the CEQA process, which is just a nightmare, and really limits the effectiveness of the state or any government in getting work done. But if you and your neighbors want to go out and cut a bunch of brush and cut a bunch of trees, most places you don't need to have a permit to do that. Just do it. If you're in a neighborhood that's got HOAs or like community codes and restrictions, often those are restrictive, and those are an obstacle to getting work done. But I think oftentimes, in my experience, if you ask someone, the answer is always no. And if you just go out and cut brush and stack it and work with your neighbors and everything else, stuff gets done. But the more you ask people, the harder it is to get it done. But yeah, there are laws on that you are supposed to cut the brush around your house, especially in areas that are protected by the state. It's more difficult in cities. There's this kind of patchwork in urban areas of who enforces what rules about hazardous fuels. Nightcrawler LA says he has neighbors that are negligent, tall pines all around. Tall trees aren't necessarily a problem if they're limbed up and you've cleaned up below them, but because the fire has to get up into the trees for it to be a problem. So it isn't necessarily a problem if you have tall trees, if you cut the brush underneath them and there's no way for a fire to get into them. If you've got a bunch of tall trees that are like one after another touching each other going into the brush, then they can catch on fire and be a problem. But the problem with tall trees is they're really expensive to get rid of. Even if you cut them down yourself, which is, very few people have the skills to do. I mean, if you want to look on the internet, you won't have any problem finding videos of people dropping trees the wrong way, which brings up another safety tip. Is there's 3 things that don't go together well in a video. There's never a good outcome if there's a chainsaw and there's a ladder and there's a tree. Like those 3 things, if there's you don't even need to watch the video. If those three things are happening, you can just like skip the video and know that the guy broke his neck. So don't climb a tree. Don't climb a ladder with a chainsaw ever. Just don't do it. That's why the pros climb trees, because just ladders and chainsaws, like you put those 2 together, instant back injury. Just bad idea. Yeah, Contrarian says ask for forgiveness instead of permission. Hey, Contrarian, I was looking at some of the video, that spot fire we saw last night in La Panza. I was looking at video in the daytime at the same spot, and that was actually a flare-up of a part of the fire that was actually already burnt from the day before. But that was a good spot on your part of seeing that start in a place that didn't seem reasonable. I looked at it. I don't think it was done on purpose. But yeah, he got that. He got the memo. Like, ask forgiveness instead of permission. That applies to so many things. But yeah, go out and cut the brush in your yard. Don't let feeling like you're going to get busted prevent you from going out and like pruning the brush and pruning the trees. Oftentimes people cut too many trees though. Like if you have oak trees in your yard and they're like nice and big, and it's like, well, prune them up. Like, prune as high as you get a pole saw, or rent. Like, you can get a pole saw that's like a chainsaw on a stick. Don't climb a ladder with it. But you should just go prune things. Like, cut all the branches you can reach from the ground. You're not going to kill the tree. But don't let feeling like you're going to get busted keep you from like fire safing your place. You don't want your hedge to grow it up to your wood siding. You don't want your wooden fence to go right up. You got to watch our next episode 3, how to harden your home of the LA fire series, because we cover a lot of this stuff, and there's just a lot of stuff. Once you learn how to read the landscape for fire hazard, you won't ever be happy in your neighborhood again, but you'll have a better idea of what you need to do to protect yourself. Yeah, and if you don't know what to do, call CAL FIRE. Ask them to come out and tell you what you should do, and they're very helpful. And they won't write you a ticket. If you call them up and say like, hey, I don't know what to do, they're not going to come and like tell you like, oh, you're fine because you got brushed by your house. They'll come out and they'll like tell you, cut that tree, here's what you need to do. Even if they come and do an inspection and you don't pass, they don't fine you. They give you a list of things to do, and then if you don't do that, they might fine you, but they rarely do. But ask for help. That's, ask your volunteer fire department, ask people for help, because a lot of people know how to do it. But yeah, get a little pole saw, do your weed eating, rake, clean up. It's hard. I realize that a lot of people don't have time to do anything beyond go to work and cook and do your dishes and everything, and it's expensive, but it's kind of essential. It's absolutely essential to take care of this stuff. It's more important than just about anything else that you could be doing with your spare time. 6 crews order for a burning operation. Thoughts of where on the Gifford fire? Geoplanet Jane said she had all of her work done 3 weeks before the campfire, and her house survived. Oh, man. All right, I'm still here. I just gotta take a breath. It's getting late. Someone's asking about firing on Gifford. California contrarian lives in rural Corning. Trying to think what else we got to share right now. I just went up to Oregon. I went up to Port Orford, and I kind of am cursed in that now that we know, once you have your eyes kind of tuned into fire hazard, it's really hard to unsee it. And so we stayed here in a little house in the woods, and it's so thick. It's so thick up there, and usually the Oregon coast doesn't burn, but when it does burn, it's going to burn like a mofo because it's so lush and so thick. And so what will happen is you'll get a big east wind event, and a fire will burn out here to the coast, and it'll be kind of catastrophic because it's not on people's radar on the Oregon coast. They don't have frequent fires. It's not on their radar like it is other places where there's more fires. But it's always interesting going, traveling, and we came down here to Smith River. There's a little kind of tidbit. This is right at the California-Oregon border on the coast, and this is all private timberland here, and this is all kind of like tulip farms, Easter lilies, and we did a project up here a couple years ago for the Smith River for the Tolowa Indian Nation, and they own a casino here and they have some land, but they said that this landscape is basically kind of done a 180 in the last like 150 years, that this coastal plain used to all be giant redwood trees, and the hills were all like meadows and oaks and grasslands. And then the white man came and they chopped down all the trees in the flats, and then they planted all these trees, or they kind of converted the landscape to these kind of like conifer plantations. And so now it's kind of like the landscape is completely opposite of what it used to be. And so they kind of want to try to figure out if they can buy some land up here. And I was thinking, like, well, it'd be great if the tribe could buy this land and actually clear cut it and use the money from that to fund their restoration, or to fund the purchase, you know. And that there's places where like clear cutting and logging is actually like would be the best thing you could do in a landscape that maybe in the past wasn't covered with this carpet of little kind of dug fir that have no kind of cultural value. Like there's stories here about, you know, these huge elk herds and you know, all this gathering and all this other stuff you could do in these grasslands, and now there's not a lot of elk. And it's like, well, yeah, if you could like buy some of this timberland, clear cut it, turn it to a meadow basically, and then restore it to oaks, clear cut everything about the oaks, and then actually pay for the land. So just got me thinking that there's lots of creative ways to make progress, and that, you know, if you close your mind off to logging as a tool or these other economic kind of potentials, you miss opportunities. So that's what we drove through, checked out some big redwoods, and 8 hours in the car, and lots of thoughts. David K says I should clarify not to go cutting trees on other people's property. Yes, for sure. But on your own property, don't make it too complicated. I'm not practicing forestry without a license here. I was telling you there's lots of good resources that you can read on online about what you should do on your property, and don't let getting busted keep you from taking care of business. And don't sue me if you get in trouble, because I'm just some guy on the internet. But yeah, don't cut trees on other people's property. Know where your property line is before you start cutting. But try to get your neighbors on board, because if you can rent a chipper for a day, makes a lot more sense to do your neighbors and your place at the same time, or even hire a piece of equipment. But you got to work with your neighbors if it's possible. Thanks, David K. Hey, my wife, London Pottery, sharing a link to our merch. Contrarian says you can't start a fire with a magnifying glass anymore. Yeah, you can actually. My kid's an expert. Does he mean it's against the law? Okay, so what I wanted to say, another thing I thought about driving up here through Southern Oregon is that climate change is real. We believe in climate change around here, and it's expressing itself in Southern Oregon turning into Northern California. One, because all of us Northern Californian people are moving up there, but two, because our climate is moving there. Our climate's moving north, and they've got a different fire regime than us, but not that different. And when you go to Ashland, Medford, Central Point, as you go kind of north, you see a lot of ponderosa pine, and they're starting to have more fire issues similar. They're getting hotter and drier. It's climate change, people. And so, 30 years from now, Oregon is going to have their own kind of CAL FIRE, air tankers, everything else. Like, it's still kind of a little bit like the dark ages up there with their resource availability. They don't have the crazy spy planes flying over shooting lasers at their fires to not to start them, but to map them. But it's coming. It's another thing that really jumped out at me on this drive was ton of Doug fir mortality. So you go over Siskiyou Summit at the California border, and you kind of come down into Ashland, and we've had a big kind of Doug fir die-off in Northern California around Chico, up in the foothills here. There's just a huge amount of mortality in these forests. Part of that is due to keeping fire out of there, forests being over thick. Part of it's kind of long-term drought. But it's a thing. There's just so many similarities between Southern Oregon and Northern California that you see when you drive around with your eyes open. Someone says sky's red in Victoria or in Vancouver. I'm just going to turn on the heat satellites and see if I can see the Puget Sound fire. I'm glad my wife's watching from inside the house. All right, here's Hood Canal. This must be the fire the guy's talking about. Doesn't look like it's very big. Lake Cushman. Says the bear fire. Let me give you something else to look at while I make a map real quick. Looks like this Bear Gulch fire has been burning for a long time. I'm pulling up the infrared here. All right, almost got it. Alright, so we're looking at the Bear Gulch fire in, this is a request from Sean. You want to look at this fire that's burning, so now we've jumped completely different place in the landscape. We're up, here's the Canadian border, here's Seattle, here's Portland. So we're in Washington up in the Olympic Mountains, and this is the Bear Gulch fire, which looks like it's got it's been burning for like a month. There's a lot of scattered heat out here, but I'm just pulling up yesterday's perimeter to see if we can see where there's any new growth. All right, so this fire hasn't really spread in the last 24 hours. The reason there's a lot of kind of scattered heat is because it's heavy timber and that stuff burns for a long time. July 6th, 35 days, super rugged, almost no. They say it's here till winter. Yeah, maybe so, but right now it's not doing much. It looks like this fire's kind of run out of terrain in some way, on some fronts. Like it ran. It's interesting when you see a fire that is kind of run up into the elevation and just stopped, gets to kind of tree line, and it can't go no more either because it's too cold or it's too wet or it's. But usually you see a run like this, it didn't stop there because there was firefighting. It stopped there because it just kind of ran out of gas. Someone says over a century of high-grade logging creates a lot of dense, fire-prone, vulnerable forests. David K says you can be prosecuted for working on a tree over 15 feet tall without a license if you cause more than $500. And if you do it while you're on the ladder, then you get an extra fine for being an idiot. Yeah, that's kind of one of the big rules is don't be an idiot with your saw. I taught myself how to use a chainsaw because my dad was scared that I would hurt myself if he taught me to use it. So what I've discovered is that's not the right approach. If you don't want your kid to learn bad habits, you should teach them of course, my dad didn't have any good habits with a chainsaw because he was self-taught himself. So take a class. There's a class called S212, Wildland Chainsaws, which is a great class, and it's offered a lot if you live in places that have fire. And if you can take a saw class, you'll learn everything you need to know about taking care of your saw, how not to kind of get bound up when you're cutting trees that are weird. And you'll learn all about, it's kind of like hunter safety. You learn about all the ways to not do something. Super important skill for any self-respecting hillbilly. Oh, man. Canyon fire. Canyon fire's out. Yeah, canyon fire's pretty much done. Someone says, is Ho in danger? I think if we got a minute here, I'm going to see if I can pull up a satellite image of this fire because, as we've been saying, oftentimes these fires aren't terrible. They're not as bad as we might assume, you know. So here's let's just see if we can find an image that is not all cloudy, which is hard in the Northwest. Looks like all the kind of recent imagery that we might be able to see, like how the fire burned, is it's too cloudy for us to really make sense of. There we go. Weird. So through the looks like this had burned at this point. Through the clouds you can see kind of hints that this landscape is not all torched. All right, here you go. So here's your fire. And you can see that it kind of burned with this kind of mixed severity, like 50% high severity, 50% not. One thing we've been talking about a lot is that some places they're designed to burn hot, you know. So rainforest, west side, Douglas fir forest, like it didn't burn very often, and then when it did burn, it would be like a drought, and it would burn like crazy and kill all the trees, and then you'd have like a reset. And so in some places where we talk about thinning to kind of reduce fire hazards or thinning to kind of reduce fire severity, it's like, well, why? Why, if the natural cycle of this particular kind of forest is to burn hot once every 100 years, why would you want to thin it so it doesn't burn hot every 100 years? Do you think that we're going to somehow get a better outcome with saws than nature's going to get? Like, every forest type is so different. It's such a huge country. And here's some fire history in this country. Not much fire history out here. Like when you compare that to California, like it's showing a couple little teeny fires here versus like the east side of the mountains. This program's called CalTopo. It's a really awesome. A lot of the features are free. If you pay a little more, you get the satellite imagery and everything else. So if you look at the kind of fire history of California, where it's dry versus the kind of like the Oregon coast, you see, you know, these patterns. Someone asked why there's all those fires in Oregon, and it's like, well, there's a lot of dry timberland, especially eastern Oregon. It's just fire country. You have lightning, you have dryness, you have fuel that's ready, and so you've got these patterns to places on the landscape that love fire. They get it. They just get it from God and from humans being careless. And so much of California is like that. You know, we got all of it's a Mediterranean climate. We got what we need to support fires. Clayton Kelly says, might have missed it, but there's a great stop on the Tiger Fire yesterday. In an area that hasn't had a fire for a long time. Yeah, I saw it unfolding. I was glad they caught it because, what we worry about a lot is these areas that haven't burned yet, right? Like we've got the Dixie Fire, and we've got the Park Fire, and we've got the Bear Fire. Now we've got the no fire for 100 years, and it's due. It's due. This is 1900 to present. And you got some fires out here that are really like old. But what matters is that kind of, there's these places out here like south of the Caldor Fire, Calaveras County. Like we're due for some really big fires in some of these landscapes that don't have any of that fragmentation. Seagot says, look at the area east of Bakersfield. I'd say if you're interested about fire history, get on this app. It's caltopo.com, and you can use it for free if you like it. You give them some money, then it turns on a few other features like being able to use that kind of recent satellite imagery and stuff. But it's great, and it also has fire perimeters in there. So like if we're looking here at our current fire, Gifford, you can come in this app and just turn it on. And you can make your own maps. You can say like, oh, well, I want to see the fire history out here. And you can turn on the recent fires in the area. So pretty cool app. All right. Okay, so with that, check out our website. We've got a feature on there about our new movie, and it's got bios of my guests, Tim Chavez and Denny O'Neill and Harrison Rain. Good stuff. And while you're there, click on this thing, Shop Hats and Mugs. My wife makes beautiful pottery, and she's got lookout mugs. And we got t-shirts, and we got the new Sasquatch sticker, which is like, these are flying off the shelf. Sasquatch with a drip torch. And we got Sasquatch t-shirts coming soon, along with we're gonna have hoodies this winter, but we're not ready to sell hoodies because it's 105 degrees out. But it helps us keep the lights on here. And before I go, I want to play my sponsor deal again too, because they're a very important part of our survival right now. So if you need fire equipment, check out these guys. And send us your stuff. If you got photos, videos, other stuff that would be useful on our broadcast for telling the story. This is the Park Fire here. This is us burning up in paradise with the community. But our sponsors, Q-Tech, make these really nice small pumps you can tow behind a UTV, put them in a pickup. Water Axe Pumps is another sponsor. And Firebox, if you're more serious, you need a Firebox. These things, incredible tools. And I'm out. Thank you all.